So, moving along as we discuss about research methods, we have to think about how we evaluate our research. As you can imagine, not all surveys are created equal. And so, in order to be able to trust our results, our measures must be both reliable and valid. And so, refers to the consistency of measurement. If we administer the same survey multiple times to multiple participants, we want the results to be the same every time. There's a few different types of reliability. And so one is test retest reliability. This is a measure of the reliability attained by giving the same test twice to the same individuals over a period of time. If I'm doing a study that has multiple waves of data collection and I give my participants a depression measure at the first wave, I'd expect their scores from each of the following waves to be generally pretty similar. Depression, things like depression are going to vary a little bit, but I would expect them to remain largely the same. The exception would be if I were doing some sort of an intervention study with depression as my dependent variable or the one that I'm trying to change. So, high test retest reliability overall, unless we're talking about your dependent variable or the variable that you're trying to change, um, high test retest reliability is found if scores are pretty similar over time. Inter-rater reliability involves consistency among raters or coders. So say I have some open-ended data that I need to code. Can't just have one person do it because their biases and perspectives could creep in and bring subjectivity to my research. So to combat this, we use multiple raters in order to increase our confidence that everyone is interpreting the data consistently and in the same way. We would also use in inter-rater reliability for naturalistic observation. We'd want two different raters or coders to observe the data and then compare. So high inter-rater reliability suggests that the two coders agreed the majority of the time. Now, validity is the extent to which a measure assesses what it claims to measure. So, if you're trying to measure depressive symptoms, are you actually capturing how depressed that person feels? Or are you really asking about their level of anxiety instead? We want to make sure that we are asking what we intend to ask. Now, this part can be confusing, but bear with me. A test has to be reliable to be valid, but a reliable test can be invalid. Whoa. All right, hold on. Has to be reliable to be valid, but a reliable test can be completely invalid. Say I step on my bathroom scale. It tells me that I weigh 500 pounds. Now, I love to eat, but I don't think that's how much I weigh. That is not a valid measure of weight for me. But if I step on the scale over and over and over again, and it keeps saying 500 pounds, here we have a scenario of high reliability. That scale is consistent, but it's consistently low in validity. It's consistently wrong. Okay. So a test can be both reliable and invalid, right? That test is reliable over and over and over again. I'm getting the 500 measure of 500, but it's invalid. Let's take a look at an example. I really like this visual. So take a second. How's the reliability here? Is it high or low? And remember, reliability is how consistent we are. What about the validity? How accurate are we? Assume that we're trying to hit the bullseye. This is an example of low reliability and low validity. Unreliable, invalid. It's not reliable because those darts are all over the place. It's invalid because we are not measuring what we are supposed to be measuring. We're not actually hitting the target. How about this example? How would you rate the reliability and the validity? High or low? This one is reliable, but it's invalid. This is the bathroom scale measure. It's consistent, right? They're consistent. All of those darts are hitting about the same point. They're consistently hitting the wrong spot. They're consistently invalid. High reliability, low validity. This last one is what we're looking for. This is both reliable and valid. And it's reliable because it's consistent. All of the darts are hitting the same point, and it's valid because they're hitting the right spot. I don't have an example here that's low reliability and high validity. Um, it's just not possible to do that. Low reliability means the darts would have to be all over the place, like this one. But high validity means that all of the darts would have to hit the target. It can't both be all over the place and hitting the target. It doesn't work like that. If they're incongruent, you can't have both. So the test has to be reliable to be valid, but it doesn't have to go the other way around. You can't be inconsistently on point. It doesn't work like that. Um, and so thinking about what we do with our research once it's done, our goal is usually to disseminate our work in some way or another. We are trying to send it out for people to read it and to understand what it is that we're doing. And we do this in two major ways. The first is through conference presentations, and the second is through publications in peer-reviewed journals. Now, the ability to lie, the design pitfalls we've talked about before, these all necessitate a sort of fail-safe to make sure that only quality research is being disseminated, or to increase the odds that only quality research is being disseminated. Now, I'm not trying to say that researchers intentionally lie. I mean, I'm sure it happens, but it's few and far between. More often than not, there's human flaws in the thought process or in the math or whatever it is. And so we use peer review as a way to make sure that we are quality controlling the research that gets published in empirical journals. And so peer review is sort of the gold standard to help identify flaws and try to prevent shoddy work from making it out into the field. Peer review is exactly what it sounds like. Before a journal will accept your paper for publication, they're going to send it out to people who are experts in the field. And so these reviewers will read your paper, they'll evaluate your methodology to make sure you didn't fall into any of the design pitfalls we talked about before, and that your statistics are properly representing your work. So let's get the quick overview of peer review.
Scholarly articles, academic articles, peer-reviewed articles. You may have heard these terms used by your professor, but what do they mean? Essentially, these are all different ways of describing the same thing, research articles that have been published in scholarly journals. But what is a research article, and how does it get published in a scholarly journal? First of all, the article reports a scholar's research practice and findings, and it's written with an audience of other researchers in mind. Finally, in order to be published and accepted by the scholarly community, the article must pass several quality tests. The most important of these tests is called peer review. We can get a better understanding of the role of peer review if we look at the academic publishing process as a whole. Let's imagine a researcher who wants to share a discovery with the academic community. To do this, he writes a draft article describing his research and findings and submits it for publication in the scholarly journal. Here's where the article has to pass its first test. The journal's editor reads over the article to decide whether it's a good fit for her journal. If it is, she sends copies of the article to a group of experts to evaluate the article's quality in a process called peer review. This is the article's second and most important test. These experts are the author's peers, since they're working in the same research area. And since they're making a judgment about the article, they're sometimes called referees. So peer-reviewed articles are sometimes called refereed articles. Each reviewer evaluates the article by asking questions to judge the quality and significance of the research. Questions like, what is this research about? Is it interesting? Is it important? Is the methodology sound? Are the conclusions logical? And are the findings original? Based on the answers to these questions, the reviewers decide whether the article is worthy of publication in the journal. They then make a recommendation to the editor, either approve the article for publication or reject it. Even if they recommend publishing the article, they usually expect the author to make revisions. The editor, however, makes the final determination whether the article should be approved, rejected, or revised. Rejection is common, though. The most prestigious journals are very selective about the articles they publish, so they tend to have high rejection rates. Some journals reject more than 90% of the submissions they receive. From the time the researcher first submits his draft article to the time it is finally published, several months or years may have elapsed. Once the journal is published, it is made available to subscribers, which are usually university libraries, because individual subscriptions are very expensive, often hundreds or thousands of dollars a year. By the way, like all established systems, the peer review system has its critics, and scholars continue to think about how the peer review process might be improved. The library has tools to help you find peer-reviewed research.
Peer review is a really useful process, and so you might find in some of your classes that your professors have you do peer reviews on each other's work. Um, we use it as a way to quality control research, but it's also a really effective way to make you a better writer. I review a lot of papers for journals that are like adolescence, social media, feminism. I get a lot of that across my desk, and it's made me a better writer because it helps me to look at things from a different perspective. So don't knock peer review. It's actually really, really useful. And again, it's not perfect. It can be flawed. Sometimes you, as an author, you submit your paper and you get a review that you don't agree with or doesn't make sense to you. And it's all sort of part of the process. And so you would make the changes to your article, and then you write a letter to the reviewers, kind of addressing the changes you made or or defending your position and saying, I'm not going to make these changes. But peer review is the gold standard. This is the way that we quality control our journals. The last point I want to make is that of replication. We talked about replication, I think last week, but replication is where we repeat a study to see whether the earlier results are duplicated. You might be wondering why this is important, why we need to replicate our research. How do we know if we can't repeat it, how do we know that what we found the first time was actually it and wasn't just an error or chance or dumb luck? We're having a bit of an issue in the field right now because we've historically not done a really great job replicating our findings. And so now that when we go back and we try to replicate some of our earlier work, we're finding that it doesn't replicate. That's not ideal. And so that's something that the field is really trying to grapple with right now. Meta-analyses, this is not exactly replication, but meta-analyses are a way of taking a bunch of papers and putting them all together, and sort of combining all of the statistics together. And you're almost using the studies as your participants. And so you're putting everything together, and it gives you a better estimate often of the variables of effect. Don't worry too much about that. The point is that replication is really important in order for us to have confidence in the things that we're finding. I'm not gonna play this now. It's kind of tough to do on a recording, but if you're ever interested and you're looking for a way to study for this week, there's a really fun research methods Jeopardy game I'm a big fan of. I use this a lot when I teach research methods, so you can check this out. It does a good job of going through a lot of the things that we covered this week.